Hello and welcome back. It's me, Gooder, with my good friend
Dan, and we're going to be talking all about Lost.
as we continue to get lost. So this time around, we're on Deus Ex Machina, however you want to say it.
I'm going with Deus Ex Machina, but I might change my mind halfway through this podcast.
God from the Machine. And I think that's an interesting choice of title, but I'll talk about that a bit later on.
Okay, yeah.
But in the main part for this one, we've got a lost flashback, a horrible accident on the island.
Yep. So first things first, just to take it in order, one of the things that, unfortunately, this is the annoying follow-up of having now learnt about the numbers, is that you start to think about numbers a bit more. And this episode does what pretty much every other episode seems to do, which is have I was going to use the term flashback, but that's probably confusing because there's actual flashbacks. So sort of a recap.
A
recap of things. And immediately, because I've got numbers in my head, the fact that Locke had been living with his disability for 4 years immediately sort of leapt out of me.
Right, yeah.
So I was like, there's that 4 again. And that, it could just be another case of the number, but then the bit that's immediately sprang into my mind was the fact that 4 years ago was also the time that Sam Tooley shot himself. And therefore, in my head, I'm kind of wondering if there is actually something, like some bigger picture item that occurred 4 years ago that potentially started to set the scene for all the things that's happening.
Yeah.
So that's just something that immediately cropped up. And I think that it's partially because I've just had the numbers episode, partially because these things are swinging mind. And it may just be that there's a limited amount of years that they can go back to in a space.
Yeah.
But I've definitely got in my head a sort of sneaky suspicion that there may be almost steps in terms of what led people to be in the situations they were. And I'm sort of wondering if something happened 4 years ago, maybe triggered by something that happened on the island 4 years ago, that then impacted the wider world and has caused Locke and Hurley and all the other people potentially to start their journey towards the island or something. But just an idea at the moment. But that was it'll probably prove to be nothing, and it'll just be that every single time one of these numbers comes up from now on, I'm going to have theories racing.
Yeah. I think that's part of the beauty of the show. Like, now you get these questions raised, and now you're constantly like looking for things. But yeah, again, we go back to the flashback, and it's again fathers and sons.
It is very much fathers and sons. First of all, Locke with hair, don't like it. Locke with hair. Just saying that.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting flashback for some of the things, because it's revealed at the very start that Locke's working in a kind of quite low-level job in a toy store. We find out that he was basically raised in like orphanages or like care homes.
Yep.
Having been abandoned by his mother, he's never known his dad.
Yeah. There's a whole load of interesting. Well, first of all, the one of the questions that I didn't get an answer to is how far back that was supposed to be. We assume it's got to be at least a reasonable space of time because he can walk, so it's more than 4 years. He's got hair, so it could be 50 years ago for all we're concerned. But yeah, it was because he mentions a brother as well, and you kind of think, well, if he's an orphan, would that be an actual brother that he's found, or is that like maybe a foster or something brother? But yeah, a whole load of mummy and daddy issues in this particular one. I mean, particularly daddy issues with the fairly horrendous ending relationship with Cooper and Anthony Cooper. Was that his dad's name? I did find like the resolution to that sort of fairly hard to swallow. Like, it did seem like a really overly convoluted route for this man to like, I'm going to track down my son, do this fairly elaborate con with
to get the
mother.
Yeah.
So there was that it did seem a little bit, possibly a bit unbelievable. I mean, it clearly had, it worked quite well in terms of the emotional impact on Locke himself, the sort of betrayal that he's experienced because of it, his clear, very firm desire to get in touch with his father now that he knows that he's there and have a relationship with his father. And almost immediately, it didn't take him very long to step up and say, "Oh, take my kidney." So it really does show a lot. And then you've got the complete betrayal by the father figure, which has got to set the scene for what Locke is like as a character moving beyond that, in that he's put so much faith and trust into this thing, only to be betrayed completely. And there's a good mirror of that in terms of what goes on the island, in terms of his faith towards the island telling him what to do, and him losing his faith because it fails, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, interesting in terms of the flashback stuff. I noted down that you drove a VW Beetle, which it didn't strike me as the kind of car that I thought Locke would be driving around in. Is that?
Well, I think that's one of the things, isn't it? Where this is a very different Locke to the Locke that we see, like on the island. This is kind of the kind of fairly kind of very average type person who would fade into a background. Type of him. Obviously, like you say, he's still got the, I guess, like that compassion there that we have seen Locke display on the island as well. But yeah, it's probably the betrayal here that kind of does feed into that, also that harsher edge that you see in him in the island set stuff.
And I think that's why I was kind of looking for some kind of clue as to exactly where in his life, like how long ago this was, because it almost seemed to feed into, like, if Locke's arc was, he was abandoned as a kid, but sounds like he had a brother, he played games with him, he didn't have a totally horrendous childhood, and was probably just average guy working in a toy store up to this point. Then we might have a period of, having been betrayed by his father, he goes off and presumably at some points develops all the hunting and bits and pieces skills that he's got, and then ultimately he's going to somehow get paralyzed and end up on the island. And we see
that's definitely one of the things that it's quite intriguing. Is this isn't definitely implied to be like Locke's first kind of starting of an interest in hunting, and that's coming from his father. And it's I think you can say it's quite interesting that despite the betrayal by his father, that is something that he continues.
I mean, it's not completely clear cut, but it certainly seemed like he certainly wasn't. He agreed pretty rapidly. Oh yes, I'll go hunting with you. And I wasn't sure if that maybe implied he had some interest beforehand, but it certainly struck me as, well, that's the thing he's taken away and presumably does a lot more of between this point and when he loses the ability to walk.
There's a little bit of a conversation between him and his dad where I think his dad asks him if he's been hunting before, and he's like, "Oh no." And then there's that bit where his dad is like, "You're not one of these like animal rights people."
It serves a good purpose, I think, the flashback, in that it's immediately you've given this extra sort of stage into how Locke became Locke without maybe giving too much away. I was kind of interested in the fairly obvious placement of the mousetrap game. I couldn't quite figure out
what
a hint on whether or not it was anything more than the sort of, what's it called? Is it Rube Goldberg?
Oh, the Rube Goldberg machinery. Yeah.
I love Mousetrap. Mousetrap was a great game.
I don't know whether it's just my family set. We could never get it to work properly.
I think that was a fairly common thing, that there was
the ball would get halfway round and then fly off or stop. The other things I take from the flashbacks here is, although we're kind of told that his mom has psychological problems.
Yep.
And then B, from her later appearance, it's kind of confirmed that she was just kind of playing a Locke along. in cahoots with his dad to get his.
Yeah.
But I think that there's those bits where she tells Locke, "You're special," and kind of wonder, is that something that he has then kind of internalized, because
Yeah.
he clearly does on the island have this kind of belief that in some way he is special and the island is talking to him for
Yeah.
something.
And I did wonder if there was a connection to Walt, in that Walt is the other character who's been described as being special. But it's very difficult to judge because you really don't get a good read on the mum, because at one stage you just think she's just a loon. And then you kind of go, oh no, she's actually playing a part in this con. And that's all you're left with. So you can't really form a very strong view as to. I mean, she apologizes. That's the one sort of almost saving grace about it. She does justify what she's done. But yeah, it was a difficult one. But and the only thing that crossed my mind is like, oh, I wonder if Locke is similar to Walt in some way with this whole special idea.
Yeah, because there is that sequence where Locke has his hallucination or dream,
Yeah,
or whatever it is, where he sees the plane, he sees Boone like all bloodied.
Yeah. So I mean,
those things do turn out to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was probably, if we move on to the sort of stuff that goes on the island. I mean, that was probably, to my mind, the biggest continuation of the supernatural elements. Almost was Locke's vision, dream, however you want to describe it, because it's interesting in that it covers off so many things, in that it's looking in the past, in the future, and sort of the present day, all sort of wrapped into one, because he sees the exact plane crash, which is something that clearly has happened sometime in the last 10 years ago. And it's, it is the exact plane. It's the same type of plane. They find the location of it. So that's, interesting. Then he sees Boone all bloodied, like he ends up by the end of the episode. So that's something that's going to happen in the future.
And he also sees Boone reference something from Boone's past.
Yeah, which it would be like presumably 25, 30 years ago when Boone had a nanny. So it was like prophetic on so many different levels, that thing. And you just go, when you realize that all those pieces have indeed occurred, you kind of think, okay, well, this is clearly, this isn't a coincidence. This isn't a hallucination. This is clearly, there's too much in there.
Yeah.
It all fits together, that there's something going on there. And is that the island? Is that him being special? We don't really know. And there's a few things about it. Like, I don't know why, like, he hears Boone saying that Teresa falls up the stairs or down the stairs. There's possibly a reference there to the fact she broke her neck, and I kind of wonder if that's what happened to Locke, maybe, when he got paralyzed. Or
I think it ties in, like you mentioned, the title earlier. I think it ties into the choice of title for this episode, a lot of this stuff, because I think if you take it as the literal kind of translation, which is along the lines of God in the machine, then I think that's really kind of almost the episode title signposting paranormal stuff is happening, because from my point of view, that title relates to the fact that there is clearly, or there appears to be, shall we say, some kind of entity connected to the island, because we see Locke physically losing like his ability to walk and the feeling in his legs as his faith kind of wavers, which I think does imply there is definitely a supernatural presence of some kind.
And it's that whole sequence about that I found really interesting, because in essence you have Locke at his sort of most intense faith right at the beginning, where he's building the trebuchet, and Boone's almost kind of in awe with Locke in terms of how he can actually build this thing and how he's done the engineering and all of that. and then it fails. And I think the line is like, "This was supposed to work. This was supposed to work."
Yeah.
And you see him immediately lose faith, and it's instantaneous that he has no feeling in his legs, because as it breaks, it's the shard goes into his leg that he doesn't feel. So it's almost like it's difficult to say if it's like a punishment or. In my mind, it wasn't. It was less of a punishment, but more of a, here is a challenge that you must now overcome, because I'm not letting you into the hatch. I've smashed your trebuchet. I'm taking away your ability to walk or feel your legs, and you're going to need help to do it. You're not going to need Boone to carry you and all of these bits and pieces. So yeah, I think that whole sequence where he's sort of steadily losing the ability to walk, but he's still determined. He's still sort of, the island will show me the way. The island will give me the answer. It's that I can't think of what the line is, but it's something faith needs constant challenge in order to reinforce it, and that seems to be what this entity or whoever it is that's pulling the strings is doing. That he's not letting Locke just get into the hatch. And I mean, this is skipping ahead a bit in the episode, but I think it's all linked together. You've got the ultimate resolution that, having tested and trialed Locke throughout the whole of this episode, and Locke, still perceiving the faith, still doing everything he can, but then being utterly destroyed by the fact that he's got Boone effectively killed, is finally shown a glimmer of something, which is, ironically, just a light coming on in the hatch. This is like, okay, I've tested you enough now. I'll give you a glimmer of hope at this point in time.
I think there's some argument there as well about, is Boone injured because Boone starts to question everything? Like, there's an angle there where you can argue that because Boone really does start to question what Locke is doing, what are they doing? Like, is the island punishing Boone? It's certainly an angle you could possibly.
Yeah, I think you could definitely take that as a way of doing it. At the same time, though, I mean, Boone, while he's questioning Locke, and he's never shown the same faith in that, he doesn't have that belief in the destiny of the island or whatever.
Yeah, he's not had that same kind of fanatical, like.
But at the same time, he does carry Locke the whole way on the journey. He does climb up and do what Locke is asking him to do. And the kind of really interesting thing is the fact he gets injured basically as he gets on the radio to try and call for help.
And I think that's a thing, something you can almost overlook, is the fact that Boone starts to get an answer, and he's the first person to get an answer.
Yeah.
On a radio.
And I had to play that back a couple of times because I was like, couldn't quite hear what they said there. And I sort of deliberately went back and listened to it. And I'm pretty sure that it was basically saying, we are survivors of flight 815 or whatever. Like, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be other survivors from the plane that he hears. I'm not 100% certain of that, because even played it back, but I'm pretty sure he says, we are survivors of Oceanic Flight 815, and the response is almost identical back.
Yeah,
it's like almost we're survivors of Oceanic, as far as I could tell.
You're not the survivors, we're the survivors.
And so I know, because I can't remember when, but there was one of the earlier podcasts that we did, I think you sort of hinted that there are other survivors, that there might be a tail section or something. So I'm kind of assuming, putting that together, that this is probably communication with some other group of survivors we're yet to see.
I think it's something along the lines of Boone sort of calls out, then he gets a reply saying, I think the reply says, is somebody out there? The first reply he gets. And then, they have that kind of, Boone says he's a survivor, and then the other people say, we are survivors.
Yeah. And that immediately sort of throws up all sorts of questions, because if there is another group of plane survivors that we haven't seen, that's a whole host of new characters. I'm then immediately going, how big is this damn island? Because I mean,
we've not seen each other.
We've not seen them, and it's not like our group of survivors have been subtle. They've been having a big, enormous signal fire going for the whole period of time. Are you saying how far away are they that they haven't even seen this signal fire?
And they've been crashing. Yeah, our survivors have been crashing through the jungle in all sorts of directions.
Yeah.
It's implied that Locke, in particular, has gone quite far.
Although it's interesting. One of the things I picked up on this episode, and it was just a very casual shot, but you actually see Locke with his compass again, or a compass. I don't know if it's the same one, and he does actually reference it. And that made me think that, oh, okay, so they're clearly, when they go to find the plane, they're going to somewhere that he hasn't actually been there before, because of when he gave it to Saeed, he said, oh, I don't need this anymore, implying he knew his way around, but this is clearly somewhere different.
And then, obviously there are other questions that get raised about that plane, like if it's people from Nigeria, why are there people from Nigeria like here?
Yeah, because you've got a few things from that. First of all, Locke gets a gun, probably important. I keep keeping track of all these guns. They find Nigerian money. They find a whole load of heroin, which I immediately think, oh, this could be a further temptation for Charlie somewhere down the line, as you've now got, hi, Charlie, we've got all the heroin you could ever need.
Lifetime supply,
But you kind of go, so like, it's more than like a couple of years ago that this plane has crashed. It's not like...
Yeah, they pretty much go out of the way to tell you that you can't tell when that plane crashed, because it's a bit of dialogue where I think Boone's like asking Locke, and Locke's like, well, clothes normally decompose over this length of time.
Yeah.
I was wearing this material, which doesn't decompose.
Yeah. And I think they were trying to, what they seemed to have done was, like, it was establishing it as not being like recent. So it had to be a minimum of a couple of years, but probably wasn't as old as when Danielle arrived on the island 16 years ago. Yeah. It was sort of in that 2 to 10 years or something window, I think, how the dialogue panned out. And you had the fact that the guy they found was dressed as a priest. So immediately, there's been various religious allegories going on at all this times. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, the drugs are in, was it like Madonna statues?
Statues, yeah. So there's something there. I don't know if if I was a drug smuggler, I don't know if like flying a plane just full of religious statues. I mean, how often do you fly a plane full of religious statues from A to B? It's like, oh yeah, I've just got all of these sort of porcelain statues that I'm just transporting. Really?
Yeah. And you've not sent them in a cargo plane, like you were gone. Yeah, you've gone with them for some reason.
I mean, the other thing that crossed my mind on that one is it's a relatively small plane. That plane cannot travel huge distances. It's not something that could be covering 1,000 miles or anything like that. So it begs the question as to where it's come from and how it's ended up.
Yeah, where was it?
Where did it come from? It's implying that it's somehow come from Nigeria, which is absolutely nowhere near where we believe the island is in the South Pacific. You're sort of going, how's this plane got here? Was it sort of... So I think that the closest big place we think we're somewhere near might be Fiji, but
or I guess you've got like Hawaii, I guess maybe. But no, so definitely loads of questions of like, why is this here?
Why is this here? All this sort of stuff,
Which again feeds into the various things we've had dropped about the island affecting people's navigation.
Yeah. And even the fact that like it almost landed, I think was also a sort of important thing, in that it wasn't like the oceanic flight which just came apart, and you still kind of wonder how on earth everyone managed to survive that. This was almost a landing. So it was interesting in terms of like
almost a landing, and apparently nobody survived as well.
Yeah. But you also have the fact like the body of the priest guy was while not a million miles away, was like detached from the plane.
Yeah.
But when you got to the plane, there was no pilot in the cockpit or anything like that. So
I think there's at least one body in the plane, isn't there? Because Boone gets spooked by it.
Okay.
and he
Maybe
starts
I'm remembering that wrong, but
like,
yeah.
this little bit where Boone gets spooked by a body and he starts like screaming, and Locke's like, "Are you okay?" And yeah, poor Boone draws himself together, almost leaves the plane, decides to try the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah, do feel bad now for all that time we've spent previously ragging on Boone.
Ragging on Boone. But I think the other thing about that bit, like when the plane does fall and injure Boone, first of all, we assume that the radio is going to be intact. All of the components would presumably still work. You've got the fact that Locke effectively immediately regains the use of his legs. Because he's then able to just run up, and he's in pain. And I think the fact that he's in pain is important because that wound that you got earlier is suddenly
he's feeling
he's now feeling it. Which again, it just sort of all seems to harp on that there is this something controlling what Locke is experiencing in a very orchestrated manner. That need you to walk now because otherwise this isn't going to work anymore.
Yeah, and then it's notable as well that Locke brings obviously Boone into the caves, lies about what's happened, which we kind of expect him to do.
Yeah, it was interesting because he lies, but I viewed it as not necessarily a lie of great importance because he did fall off a cliff. I mean, he fell off a cliff in a plane, but yeah, he does. He continues to hide what's going on, I think, is the important factor there. But he does still carry Boone back single-handedly.
And then, what definitely becomes an important factor is the fact that Locke then just immediately leaves, having
disappears and goes back to his precious hatch.
Precious hatch. Yeah, he is a bit Gollum about the hatch.
Yeah. No one must know about the hatch apart from me and my little pet Boone.
Yeah, so that's the main stuff that's going on the island. We do have the nice kind of little side plot about Sawyer needing glasses, and
that was quite nice, and I kind of liked the Jack ragging on him with the
got some good little character moments out of that because you kind of get out of that Sawyer not wanting to appear kind of weak, and he's just like, I will deal with it. You're like, I'm fine. You've got Kate actually kind of caring about Sawyer and being like, oh, we have to find out and sort this out for you. You have Jack then actually being quite nice to Sawyer, although he kind of teases him like Jack actually does.
And I love the bit where Kate's sort of trying to persuade Jack to go and look at him, and Jack sort of says, "Oh yeah, or what am I likely to get? Like a snappy one-liner and probably a new nickname." Is kind of
So you have that kind of nice little bit. Yeah, I like that. And then also, at the end of it, Jack kind of says, "Oh, I didn't do it for him. I did it because you asked me to Kate." But I don't know. I get a kick out of the little bit where you see Saeed MacGyvering a pair of glasses.
Yeah, it was nice that it was Saeed that made them for him. Because that's sort of repairing that relationship after Saeed did all the torturing on him. So yeah, that whole minor little side plot was quite nice in a lot of ways in terms of looking at the various characters pitching in together and Sawyer sort of getting over himself a bit more.
Yeah, kind of. He begrudgingly.
Yeah.
He's a bit he doesn't want the help to start with, but he kind of begrudgingly does in the end let people help him.
I think the only other sort of side plot bit I not jotted down was just the fact that Michael was starting to learn a bit of Korean, which I thought was
yes. Yeah, what did he say? Oh, yeah, I'm learning faster, or something like that.
Yeah,
you're an idiot. Yeah, but yeah, again, we kind of get that reinforcement that Sun and Jin really aren't speaking to each other at all now.
Yeah. And because you've got that, it's kind of even more important that slowly but surely the sort of communication barrier between Jin and the rest of the group is being broken down. And I think what's kind of interesting is that now that we've had that sort of breakup between Jin and Sun, you're seeing a lot more, at least, effort on Jin's part in terms of the communication. Like previously, it wasn't just that they didn't speak English; they deliberately sort of kept themselves to themselves and didn't try any kind of attempts to.
Yeah, you kind of see Sun kind of engaging with people a bit more. You get a little bit early on with Jin kind of bringing around the fish, but apart from that, yeah, you get the sense that he's not even trying to kind of get along with people. But now he's cool. Yeah, I think that's most of what I had on it. And yeah, like you mentioned, big cliffhanger moment right at the end is the light
coming on, and you sort of immediately go, oh, is he going to finally get in, or is someone coming out, or what does it mean that there's a light on? Because it immediately gives you, oh, this isn't something that's like just an abandoned thing. There's at least some semblance of something going on in it.
Some kind of activity, yeah. So unless you've got anything else, I think that was it for.
No, I think that was it. It was an episode that progressed the mystery side of things along quite nicely. Gave us a good insight into some of Locke's past, even though it probably asks more questions than it gives answers at this point.
Yeah. So that was Deus Ex Machina, Machina, whatever you want. And join us next time for what have we got next time? We've got marriages, transfusions, and babies.
And babies, yes.
Catch you next time on Getting Lost.